Vision. Following clues left by our ancestors, we unbury the past to reveal a knowledge of unfathomable value, putting us just a little closer to our own true birthrights. From the secret history of a possible bloodline of Jesus Christ, the secret history of America's founders, to the secret history of extraterrestrial interaction on our planet, here to bring light to the night. Your host for Night Vision Radio, Renee Barnett.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Night Vision once again. If you're just joining us for the first time, I hope you'll enjoy yourself and return. And want to say welcome to everyone who listens in on a regular basis or a not so regular basis. Glad you're here. This week, we're coming to you once again from Southwest France. We've been doing a little knocking around out in the field. I've seen some amazing sites that our historian, James Martin, was able to take me to. And, as many times as I've been here, which is many, many times since I started researching back in 2004 for our film that was released in mid-2008, I have no idea how many times, but James has a real way of digging into archival material and following clues that he finds in those documents that lead to sites that nobody seems to know about. At least not many people that I know about. We've been to some sites that I've never even heard of. Some I've heard of, but not seen yet, but others that I've never had any idea were even there. Some quite surprising, including a 5,000-year-old Celtic tomb that is in a big circular rock formation, something like certainly you would never find in France normally. So, and I'm not sure, and I'll let James tell you this, if there's anything particularly like this in anywhere else, in the UK or anywhere else. I know there's lots and lots of stone circles, but this one was quite different. And then we went to the Castle of Alaric II and also another tomb location. And we'll get into those details, maybe show a few images for those of you that are watching. If you're only listening on the KGRA website, we are live on camera on the KGRA Facebook page and on KGRA YouTube page. So hope you'll tune in and be able to take advantage of these images as well as what we're going to be saying. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce, as you all know, our Night Vision historian emeritus, James Martin. Hey, James, how are you? I know you're tired. I am too. It's 4 a.m.
It's 4 a.m. Yes. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. Yes, very tired. It's very early in the morning here in France, but yes, I'm good.
Yeah, and this has been a holiday week in France. We had Bastille Day, which we're going to be talking about at the end of this hour just a little bit. And for those who may not know what Bastille Day is, why it's commemorated, and how it compares to, our Independence Day and, the American Revolution. So there's a lot of correlations there. And this is the first time that I've actually been here on Bastille Day to experience it. And it was nice, everyone walking around, bon fête, bon fête nationale. It was really nice and reminded me very much of just recently, 4th of July, which I missed in my country. So, but, Jay, I don't know, should we talk first about that awesome Celtic tomb? and whatever else it is. I mean, I feel like there's a tomb and there's other purposes. Certainly, it is definitely constructed to act in a certain way. There are markers along different lines, which I think may line up with constellations or something like that. But I'm going to leave that to you. So I was astounded because we drove up this little road, and Jay said, just look there. And I go, where are you taking me? He goes, you'll find out. And I hate surprises, but we walked up this little path because you had to get out of the car and walk just a bit to get to this place. And, the closer I got, the more it unfolded. I could see how big it was. And I was like, what the heck is this thing? This is not like anything I've ever seen, especially here in France. So can you tell us a little bit about what that was and what you know about it, what you've learned about it?
Yeah, so there's, for those listening, there were two sites that we went to see. One was called the Dolmen de Fad, yes. And the other is what we would call it, at least in the UK, a stone circle. There are plenty of stone circles, especially around the former Celtic areas of the UK. So if you look in England, you'd be looking Cornwall, the southwest of England, then Cumbria, Scotland, and there were different types of stone circles. And the one thing about them is that there was no real history left with them. Or what I mean by that is there was no instruction manual as to what these are. But the fact that some of them are circular, some of them are dolmen, which, if you imagine the symbol for the Greek symbol for pie, not the stuff that you eat, but
but PI.
That sort of to dolmen. So yeah, the first site that we went to was a circular stone circle. This is in the Minervois, and it's quite unlike any stone circle that I've ever seen before. It's constructed in a circular fashion with what looks like horseshoes, horseshoe imprints from the top. It's
like the shape of it.
From about, yeah. I mean, it's from about 1000 BC, and I do know that it was a burial site, and I do know that. From the University of Toulouse, they have found burial objects and items. I think from memory, a bowl, a cup, and that kind of stuff. But it's very unusual.
Shades of bloodline. I don't know. That's bringing back bad memories. A bowl, a cup.
Yeah. But I mean, there's quite clearly a burial cyst within there. So if you imagine you've got a circle which is then sort of sliced in the middle to a central point, which has a slab that previously would have had a hole drilled in to allow sunlight. So potentially, on particular date or days of the year, the sunlight would shine through, illuminating the burial cyst. Absolutely incredible, and certainly nothing like we would see or do see in the UK, or even for that matter in northern France over towards Brittany, which is another area that has many stone circles. And in this area of France, you do find plenty of dolmen. I mean, this area has been occupied for tens of thousands of years. So across the Pyrenees, you have where you have dolmen, you have these very strange sort of burial mounds, if they are indeed burial. They're often referred to as capitelle, and they litter the Pyrenees. There's in a village, well, a hamlet really, called Custosa. There's a relatively famous mound, which is called the Capitelles. And this is like something you've never seen before. Now, there's some shepherd huts within a field, but you have these two huge mounds next to each other with no real entrance to them, and a bit of a mystery as to when they were erected. What are they?
Speaking of the capitels, the little structures themselves there in Custosa, a lot of people are familiar with them. They've seen them. I think there were actually photographs of them in Holy Blood, Holy Grail, if I'm not mistaken, which was published in 1982 by authors Baget Lee and Lincoln. And, people have been speculating, some people say they were shepherd's huts, but they're kind of odd. Do you really think that's what they were? It's almost like, I don't know, it almost feels like some sort of protection from something above, but I don't know. They're just little stone huts, and each one is similar but different, slightly different from each other.
I think.
What do you think the real? You think that was shepherd's huts?
I think some of them are shepherd huts. For example, there's capitels at the top of Esperanza, above a hill overlooking the town of Esperanza in the Aude.
Yeah.
And they appear to be dated to the 1800s. Or at least that's what the graffiti inside it said, and a few plaques. So I think some of them are, but the mounds that you can see at Custosa, I don't know. They're very reminiscent of the honeycomb structures that you find, the beehive structures that you find up in Argyll in Scotland. They look very similar. They are different, but their appearance is similar. Again, what they were meant to be used for is beyond me. But I do have. I grew up. A lot of my childhood was spent in and around stone circles in Cumbria. I suppose if you were to look up at the sky and you were to try and draw the sky, the only shape that you could draw is a circle. And even moving to the Dark Ages, the medieval period, most churches and castles had observatories attached to them, namely for dating Easter. But I think if you're looking at something that's circular, I mean, we tend to think of stone circles and these mounds as, it must be something to do with death. Well, actually, it could very well be a very elaborate calendar. Or it could be a gathering place, a marketplace. I mean, what we've got to remember is that the people who constructed them are modern humans. And I know we think of modern humans as, the people who are listening to this, but actually much further back, like I say, tens of thousands of years, they think like us. Yes, they have different challenges to us. But if I was constructing something circular, I'd almost be looking at the heavens. And I think if you were to look at my particular favourite stone circle, Castlerig, which is near the town of Keswick in Cumbria. My pet theory is, if you look at the stones, they almost marry with the background topography. It's almost as if to say, look, if you're coming from this direction, this is, the market goods that you might find. Equally, there are some stones that tend to align with particular stellar bodies, and we really do see this in a lot of stone circles. I mean, we talk about Stonehenge as well, don't we? And Stonehenge, I think we were talking on the drive to these sites just the other day, and yeah, but I was saying, well, Stonehenge was constructed sort of about 100 years ago. It was re-erected by the Victorians, and then again in the early 1900s. What we've seen, yes, has been tidied up, but it's pretty much in situ. And if you ever go to the north of England and to Scotland, please go and have a look at the stone circles. Yes, some of them will have been used for burial. Some of them, I think, used for markets. Some of them used for very spiritual practices. And it's the latter that I think the mounds at Custosa were used for.
Yes, you know, and, you know, back to that, the capitals and that site at Custosa that we're so familiar with, you know, one of the things that adds to the mystery of what they are and is sort of, you know, what's going on that is measurable in the land there. And I know when we went out a couple of years ago, we had some equipment, or you had some equipment with you, and you were able to measure some certain things in that area. And it was really unusual, the amount of current or whatever it was that was going through and causing the machines to redline, basically. And I remember I had this crazy idea. I said, hold on, James, let me see if I can, you know, direct this in any way. And you stood and I stood opposite you some feet and pointed, and I concentrated all my energy and thoughts into the tip of my finger, and it just spiked your equipment. Can you talk about that a little bit, and what was that piece of equipment you were using, and what did that signify?
So the piece of equipment that I was using, there were two pieces. There was one which was a magnetic flux reader. Essentially, it measures different magnetic potentials in the ground or elsewhere. The other was a typical K2 meter, which again measures sort of electric flow. Now there is an idea that you can charge stone structures by walking around them. So again, back to the UK, you have this idea that if you walk around a stone circle anti-clockwise, you know, it will bring you either luck or bad luck, dependent on the local rumour. But also, and then trying to count the number of stones, you can never do so, and if you do, then you might go crazy. But there might be something there in walking around. At the end of the day, you know, the way that our memories, the way that our thought processes occur is through bioelectrics. So we do have an electric field ourselves. So it could very well be at Custosa where you have elevated magnetic readings, magnetic potentials, and that's due to the amount of iron in the ground. I mean, this area of southern France is extremely magnetic. The ground is red. You know, for any listener that's gone up to Rennes-le-Château, you'll see just how red the ground really is. So it might be these mounds are either capping or they're sort of, I don't know, diodes, something like this, enabling us to access something. And some people, you know, believe that they can. What you were doing was sort of trying to concentrate your field, and it was interesting because, you know, I always try and keep a relatively balanced perspective on things. But yes, when you're concentrating, I didn't have too much of an explanation as to why that occurred. It just did, and was repeatable as well.
Yes, it was. And from my standpoint, you know, I wasn't feeling like, I was the powerful person that was, able to shoot energy at people. I felt like I was a conductor. I felt like it was coming up through my feet and out my finger, the point that I chose to release it, and me too. I'm not, super ooky spooky about things. I like to know, the real story, the real facts. But if the facts are weird, I want to know that too, So that was quite striking. But it was something that we could see. It was quantifiable. It wasn't just something like, I went out there and said, oh, I feel this. And I know some people do, generally that's not me, sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm affected by things. I think, for instance, when I first arrived in the region, I felt like, I was almost overwhelmed by like the energy or something. And you have to kind of almost acclimate yourself to it. And then, then you're fine. But, again, as the old mayor of Rennes Chateau said, the real secret of the area is not hidden gold and treasure. It's the telluric energy in the land. And
I think that's, there's perhaps something to that. I mean, we do know that, we know about magnetism now. We can measure magnetism in the ground and within ourselves, and there might be an interaction there. I mean, people have varied experiences when they're in this area, whether they're in a haunted house or they're in an old building or they're just sat at their desk at work. Whatever it is, certainly in this area seems to be amplified. I mean, like I say to listeners, I mean, this area is full of, it's not just stone circles, but dolmen, very spiritual burial chambers and caves. I mean, if you go into the area known as the Ariège, you've got Le Trofoir, the caves of Nio, where, a lot of these caves have been found by accident. And you have cave drawings that's from, oddly enough, the Magdalenian period. No connection, I believe, other than the name. But
5,000 years ago, right?
Yeah, these cave images and paintings and drawings are much older than the pyramids of Giza. These are incredible drawings, and they're not at the front of a cave. It's not, our thoughts of caveman as being sort of ugh and fire and grunts. It's not that. This is a very highly developed society. If you go to the caves at Nio, for example, you have to walk about 4 kilometers through the cave complex to see these images in a cathedral. Like, the acoustics are just brilliant. And
is that the one where you went in, James?
Yeah,
we were talking about going back to, possibly.
That's right.
And those are the pictures that you showed me. It's astounding what wonderful artists, they were. We think of, like you said, cavemen and, stick drawings or something like that. These are wonderful representations of animals, particularly horses and cattle. And I think, was there a saber-toothed tiger or something?
There's ibexes, there's a plethora of animals. And again, if let's dispel that idea of going into a cave, and we're all living deep in caves, because if you want a dead caveman, or woman for that matter, just blow out the torch and it's pitch black and dead caveman. Yeah. And if we've got this idea of a hunter-gatherer, really difficult to feed ourselves and live, then I suppose, well, why are you wasting your time? Not that I'm suggesting it is a waste of time, but why would you waste your energy going deep into a cave complex to draw? And how did you light the thing? I mean, all of these questions littered across the Pyrenees and into central France. There's up towards the Midi, you have cave drawings of people's hands. I mean, it's an incredible piece of work. I don't believe you can go in there anymore because of some damage with our modern atmosphere interfering with the drawings themselves. But this is absolutely incredible.
Well, to your point about how did they light? There is no evidence, and there would be much if there had been fires burned in there or torches, held. Fire leaves its mark. And so how did they do that? Do you think there's a possibility that it was once open from the top or something? Or
you'd have to remove the entire top of the Pyrenees.
Oh, well.
For that to happen. I doubt it. It's possible, I suppose. You could sort of lift it up and do your drawing and then put it back in a neat place.
When they do it. Do you think it's possible that there was some technology that was lost through history and we just don't realize it? Because as sophisticated as some of those drawings are, maybe there were other more sophisticated things that we haven't discovered yet about people that far back.
It could be mirrors, it could be different light sources. There are lots of things it could be. But it's interesting, you find, there's anthropologists who are, looking at this and trying to figure things out. But the more we learn, I mean, we can mention things like Göbekli Tepe, Nevele Kori, Çatalhöyük, for example, where the traditional school of thought has been, well, there was a fertile crescent and farming enabled more complex culture, music, art, etc., etc. But actually, they've sort of knocked it out of the park. Clearly there was some ability to sustain very complicated cultural systems, as we see at the carvings at those sites I've just mentioned. So it's incredible. And yes, in this area, you have little flavors of this too. And again,
this was, a haven for all types of groups. Of course, I don't know what was going on 5,000 years ago, but certainly in the past, there have been, many different groups of different religions and philosophies that for some reason gathered in this area, and it was a real area of tolerance, and people managed to get along. So there certainly are flavors of different groups here that seem out of place, like the Celtic stone circle. It's like, well, we do know that there were Druids here, but my goodness, that, had you ever heard of that site, and how did you find it? The big round stone circle.
So with that one, that was through work that took me to a site called monumentum.fr, and this is the French government's website for cataloguing ancient sites. So it was through that. I have an interest in stone circles and that kind of stuff anyway. So yes, and there's a few other things that I'm involved with in that, with stone circles and Neolithic areas and all of this. It's amazing just how much of our history and our culture is carved in stone.
Yeah, it really is. But I tell you, that was stunning, and I'd certainly never seen anything like it and never heard about that site. And it's in the middle of nowhere. There was no one around. No one came upon us. We were there all on our own. It was amazing. Now the other site, the other tomb that we went to nearby, people seemed to know about that. And they were, coming up and looking around. And then outside that were these stone circles of a different type, stones lying on the ground in sort of concentric circles that may have been put there sometime after the original tomb, or maybe not. What's your thoughts on that? That was really interesting.
Well, again, you've got another alignment, another solar alignment at that site. I should just explain that the previous circular site certainly had stones that rose above the outside perimeter,
like a marker.
Irregular intervals. So I would suggest that those were aligned to particular stars at the time. I would need to, and there are programs that enable you to have a look. I would need to do a bit more there to find out whether they did and what they aligned to. The second site was a burial chamber, again with a burial cyst that had a little bit more of an obvious avenue in which sunlight would shine into burial chamber, illuminating. And again, you would assume on particular days of the year. And again, I think we're talking around about 500 BC for that one. So it's relatively late for dolmen, or certainly within the dolmens that I've been to see, which are much older. But for this one is of interest again. Now, I think one of the reasons why that one's a little bit more popular, this is the Dolmen de Fad. There's picnic areas and parking and all of this, so it's a much more accessible place.
Yeah, it was very easy to get to. Sort of a campground around it, so it's obviously a popular location in the area. But we also went to a castle location on the mountain of Alaric, and where a king is supposedly buried somewhere in the vicinity of that castle, along with a particular treasure. That's another site that I had not yet been to, although I was semi-aware of it and certainly aware of the, King Alaric. And we're talking about Alaric II right now. Now, I had mentioned and posted some pictures on Facebook when we went up to that location. And a friend of ours, another researcher named Sandra Hamlet, sent me an excerpt from an old article about Alaric and that mountain. And I'm just going to read just a tiny bit. It says, the legendary treasure of Alaric is based on a sentence, a statement. Between the Alaric and the Araku is the fortune of the three lords. And a variation on that sentence is, between Alaric and Alaricu will be found the treasure of the three kings, Solomon, Caesar, and Alaric. Even now, this saying is handed down from generation to generation in the Ode. The mountain of Alaric is named after the Visigothic king, Alaric II, and the legend goes that this mountain houses the grave, fragrant with incense, myrrh, and lavender, of this famous king. Another secret is carefully guarded, the location of the fabulous treasure of Rome, which is hidden there. Pretty interesting. And, what can you tell us about Alaric II and why that location, and what do you think about that treasure? I know you feel like it might be slightly in a different location, but nearby.
Yeah, I mean,
and of course, what's really there is the Great Menorah, among other items, that people seem to feel is in this area.
Yeah, I mean locally it's called the Castle of Alaric. Its proper name is Chateau de Miramont. And what you have there is a potentially Visigothic site, or Roman site. Just to explain a little about the Visigoths. So some people tend to think that the Roman Empire collapsed and finished in around the 400s. That's true to an extent in the west of Europe. In the east, it carried on for another 1,000 years, eventually coming to an end in 1453, at least in terms of territory. It could have some arguments that it carried on through the papacy, etc. But in the West, the Roman Empire began really struggling with Huns, Goths, and various other invaders, Jutes, Danes, various other invaders from the barbarian areas of Germany. Again, just a reminder, I know I've said this before, but barbarian just means hairy. You get the word barber from it, etc. But the Visigoths settled within Rome, same with the Ostrogoths. They were what were called foederati. They were there to settle on the proviso that they fought for Rome. And eventually, tables turned, and the Visigoths end up fighting against Rome, taking over vast swathes of territory. So in this region, what's known as Septimania, actually the Visigothic kingdom extended to northern Africa, up Spain, southern France. But they sacked Rome, very famously. Now, when they did so, the capital of what was left of the Roman Empire in the west was up at Mediolanum, or Milan, but there was still a treasury in Rome. And one of the thoughts is that when Alaric the Goth sacks Rome and raids the treasury, then all of the loot that had been gained over the centuries from the Roman Empire was taken back with him. And one of the, again, local legends is that when the Romans sacked Jerusalem and the temple, they took the menorah back to Rome, and it ended up in the hands of our friend Alaric. Yep. Now, the Visigoths were desperate, really, to try and be Roman. So when we talk about Visigothic sites, they didn't tend to build too much of their own from fresh, but certainly repaired, restored Roman sites. They did build their own stuff, but they were trying to be Roman. And in fact, we ended up in this part of France with some very interesting legal systems. So if you were Visigothic, you followed the Visigothic or Roman law. If you were German, you would be following sort of German law. If you were Latin, you'd be following all of these other things. It's very confusing. The fall of Rome, I've just seen a question from Alice in Winterland. The fall of Rome occurs around about 450 years after the death of Christ, roughly. There's a few problems, namely the calendar changes. So you have this idea now that Jesus was born in 4 BC, go figure. But there we go. So Rome in the West continues for a little bit longer, but begins collapsing under the pressure of the Visigoths, Lombardians, Ligurians, and all of these others. Where did the menorah end up? Again, local rumour says that it could have ended up at our castle, the Chateau Miramont. It could. I tend to believe, though, if you understand a little bit more about Alaric,
don't say it.
pains me. pains me to say it, but that he probably melted it down if he did have it. Either into coinage or a new crown or something like that. But there we go. As of yet, if it does exist, there hasn't been any real clues suggesting where it might be.
Rather large item. I mean, I think it's, like 5.5 feet tall or something like that. 7-branch candlestick made of gold. That would have been quite heavy and, quite large, but it would have been a huge, nice amount of gold if he had another use and wanted to, it'd be interesting to know if he did do that, or to find out what he did with it and to find those items. Like if he did make a crown, that would be nice to know. If he made coins, it would be nice to find some of those coins, knowing that it was the gold from the Temple of Solomon and the menorah. But I'm hoping he didn't do that. I'm the eternal optimist, but you're probably right, looking at it from a practical manner.
Well, frequent visitor to Vindlander at Hadrian's Wall, and I have been known to say we should go and get all these stones back from the farmers' fields to restore the wall. It's horrible when you realise that bits of history may have been lost, but that's the idea. Who knows? I would hope that it's still around, alongside many other things. What was unusual about that castle, though, is it's not just the potential castle or potential capital, if you want, but potential castle of Alaric, and perhaps in the area, this is where he was buried. But it's the fact that castle was restored, rebuilt, and all of this by the Troncavels, who, if any listener knows anything about the Cathars, you're gonna run into Raymond Roger Troncavel. Famously, the Troncavel family held Carcassonne. But it was a site where you had not just a Cathar influence. The French word is Fedi. So you had a how can I put it, a sort of heretic lord, someone called Chabert de Barbera. Simon de Montfort ended up in the doing a number on this castle. But curiously, that castle also ties in with the Knights Templar also.
Oh.
So it's one of those.
A lot more into later on. I know people are expecting to hear about the Knights Templar. We're getting there.
Well, you can find a bit of information. If you want, I don't want to do some research. You can, if you have a look up the cartularies of the Knights Templar at Duzon, which was really in the order their principal preceptory. The other sites, for example, at Campansrod reported through their daughter site to the large preceptory at Duzon. But yeah, they ended up owning quite a bit of land in the area. So Pierre Raymond de Barbera, in 1153, June of 1153, ends up becoming a Templar. And it's sort of relative descendant of his that is a Cathar. This is a heretical family that owned the castle. So you have this again, the beginnings of we got Cathars in the Templar order. Bearing in mind, most Templars are not knights. About 90% of the order are John the Muck Shoveler. These are people who were farming, sending food and whatever else over to their exploit in the Middle East, and all the rest of it. So almost certainly there were people who were Cathars who were, either working land for the Templars, or, bag carrying, or, falconers, or whomever it was. But certainly at that castle, it has a very rich history. And I know that we were with, there was me, you, and another mutual friend who felt a little uneasy in one of the rooms.
Oh, yes. Miss Jeannie Dark. She did. Yeah, it's quite amazing. I was just chatting in the chat room with Katie Q, and it's just such an area of history and mystery here. It's not to get too woo woo on everybody, but there is definitely something here that is beyond what you can see, but there are also so many things to see. It's just amazing. And being from the United States, of course, and having been born and raised there, it's like coming back in time, and something that we can't really do so much. That we don't have the structures and things to look to. Of course, we have our wonderful Native American history, which I love. Growing up in Oklahoma, and we call it Native America, and was Indian Territory, and that's not a pejorative. And people where I come from call themselves Indians, even though that was sort of a misnomer when it was applied first. But yeah, there's all that. I grew up about 20 miles from the Spiro Indian Mounds, which is probably the best known, or one of the best known archaeological sites in America. And several thousand years old, and that was the Caddoan people. And it's just, amazing. And then I grew up, I was about 45 miles from the Heavener runestone, which is a giant runestone, which has now been dated back to, I believe it's 1012, with runic writing on it. So those were like wonderful things. But coming here, it's like you could stay here for a long, long time and not see everything that there is to see. And you could still uncover something. There are still things to be discovered here.
Oh, for sure.
The Moorish Castle, for instance. Who ever heard of that? Nobody. You found some reference in, academic archives and thought, and then started following, your nose basically, and you found it.
I think that this is one of the ideas, though. With history, you're finding something again because somebody knew about it. They put it there. But I think I think what you've just said there. It's a time traveler's delight. There isn't a period of history in this area, certainly, where something turbulent hasn't happened. Pretty much every culture has been here. The Greeks founded Marseille. The ancient Greeks founded Marseille. If you go to the cathedral at Elm, you find swastikas, and these are not associated with the far right and Nazis. These are potentially Buddhist symbols, of infinity and of love and of peace and all of that. And what are they doing this side of the Mediterranean? So, who knows? Or, was there are there Spanish symbols very similar to it? I mean, my point is, in this in this area, You have not just a rich history, but you have a history of not just tolerance, but of some pretty significant ways of thinking. So I know we're going to be talking a little bit about the Cathars, but let's not ignore some of the other heresies that came before. What about the Photinians? Following Photinus of Tyre. Plenty of other so-called heretics in the area. For example, Alcuin of York was in this area, and he was famously an advisor to Charlemagne. Well, really, he's sort of teacher in this way. But he's here trying to stamp out other heresies as well. So, and just bear in mind, heretic, it just means sort of really freedom of thought. But here we go. Here's what we see today. We see Alet Laban. We walked the Jewish ghetto, the Jewish quarter as was in Alet Laban as best we could. It's huge. This is in the middle of a bishopric. So what we're told about this rigid orthodoxy of the Catholic Church, there seemed to have been quite a bit of tolerance in this area. And of course, one of the great questions has been, was there a connection between the Cathars and the Templars? And I think that the answer to that is yes.
Yeah. Yep. Yes. One of our listeners, Eugene, made a good point, which, you and I often say, is that, history was basically written by the victors, whatever the agreed upon consensus was among the victors. So in a way, even if you're a history student, you still have to kind of get out there on your own, because you're going to find things that run counter to, the standard version of history. We see that all the time. And not only that there are many things that are left out because it might make people look bad, or be poorly thought of if we knew what really happened or everything that happened. So they tend to only reveal what puts them in the best light. So I totally agree with you.
If we come back to our stone circles, I mean, one of my comments to you was, well, the thing is, before we started recording history, there isn't any evidence of mass warfare. Now, there's evidence of human sacrifice for sure, but in terms of mass warfare, there's not too much. When we started to record history, why did we do that? Someone was obviously paying for this. So it's always going to be slanted. And I remember studying industrial relations, of all things, and at university, and they talk about primary evidence, and they talk about all of this. But the reality of the situation is there isn't much by way of primary evidence, because all history is biased. It's to quote again, history is a pack of lies agreed upon.
That's what Eugene said. He
absolutely.
That same quote, and it is absolutely true. We've got just about 3 minutes until the break, and I wanted to, if we could, before we go to break, share a little bit about, the history of Bastille Day, and then when we come back from the break, we're going to give our audience just a little flavor of the atmosphere around here and of Bastille Day. So, it's very comparable to the American Revolution. It's very comparable to our 4th of July holiday in America. So would you share a little bit, especially put it in the context of time, when Bastille Day happened? Why did they storm the Bastille, and why did they celebrate the storming of the Bastille?
Well, from the downfall of the Knights Templar, the Kingdom of France hasn't had a good reputation for looking after its money. And it was hoping that it would have a get-rich-quick scheme by supporting some American colonists who weren't too happy with the Brits, Renee. Anywho, so the French were supporting, in monetary terms, quite a fortune over to the American fight for independence. So the storming of the Bastille is actually indirectly the fault of the US, but in a nutshell, France is skint. It's absolutely broke. The people are absolutely impoverished, starving, and what they see is excess. They also had a huge scar in the middle of Paris, which is called the Bastille. It was a medieval castle that had become a prison and really was a symbol of royal excess and excessive power. And people had had enough of it. And as such, they stormed the Bastille. They broke in. Many people died. So there were 98 killed in the insurgents, if you will, the revolutionaries. And then there was a soldier killed as well. But on the 14th of July, 1789, is when that event occurred. And it's traditionally seen as the beginning of the French Republic and the start of the French Revolution. Just a quote before we go for break, very quickly. To the King of France, Sire, they've stormed the Bastille. Is it a revolt? No, sire, it's a revolution.
All right. And our wonderful producer has popped up our website address for people that might want to reach out to us to just say hello, to come over and visit, whatever you like. Also, we're just now populating the website. But I got to go to break. When we come back, a flavor of France and Bastille Day. Hang in there with us.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA Classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button. So just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
right. That was the French national anthem, La Marseillaise. And that's what we've been hearing this week here in France at the celebration of Bastille Day. So moving on, I know I think we've covered the sites that we saw this past week. And I know that people have been really reaching out to you and to me saying more Templars, more Templars. Everybody loves the Knight Templars and the Knights Templar. And so we are going to get into that and also try to answer the question of, which is a very highly contested question, of whether there was a relationship or a connection at all between the Cathars and the Templars, whether there was a relationship, a positive relationship, which seems that they would be at odds because there were Christian monks and the Cathars were considered, Christian heretics, and heretics were just whoever the church said they were, basically. So, in fact, the Cathar faith was at one time, it was the church that was bigger than the church, and they did a very successful job of basically wiping them out with the Inquisitions and just roaring through different areas, particularly around here, and burning villages to the ground. We have a location near here called Bram, which was decimated during that time, and also Béziers, which was, I think the whole entire town was wiped out. And I think that's the one that was notorious for, at the time, the Pope, I think it was Pope Innocent, if I'm not mistaken, when he was asked, by the commanders of the armies, how will, they were ordered to go and kill all the heretics. And they said, well, how will we know the heretics? I mean, what does a heretic look like? And he said, kill them all. God will know his own. And that was coming from the head of the Roman Catholic Church. So that was really what was going on down here. It was just a slaughterhouse, really, in a lot of places. So that was where, the idea, you mentioned Simon de Montfort earlier, and he was famously killed in Toulouse by Toulousian women, which was wonderful, to hear, because we don't hear much about that in history, where the women actually took over and brought him down when nobody else had been able to before. So I got kind of a little charge about that. So, but can you give us a little more detail on the Inquisitions in this area, maybe referring to Albi and Saint Cecile at Albi, the church where they did a lot of the Inquisitions and did a lot of torturing of the so-called heretics on the upper floors. And I visited that church. I've actually been there more than once because people, that came over with me or were on a tour wanted to go. But I will not go inside anymore. I went in there once, and it's gorgeous in there. It's all blue and, very beautiful. But down at the altar, there's a huge mural that shows people, in agony and burning in hell. And I think that's such an odd image, to be inside a church, but maybe not for that church, because we know that they're being tortured. They were in hell, but they were in hell right there at Saint Cecile. So I know you can expand on that a lot more than I can.
Well, I think for those who were Cathar, yes, they believe that this plane of existence was hell. In that way, I mean, a lot has been said about the Cathars. Firstly, they didn't know themselves as Cathars, and there is still lingering debate.
Yep.
Yeah, bonhomme, bon femme, that kind of stuff. But whether or not the Cathars were a church, again, is up for debate. There were certainly attempts to make it a church, but really,
I said church, but the religion was much bigger at one point than the modern church that we know today, and that's why they were dangerous, because they were large.
Well, for the church, they in the Dark Ages. So we're looking at around the collapse of the Roman Empire in the West, so 450s to, let's say, 1066 roughly. There really was a real threat to the Catholic Church from Europe, which was repaganizing, if you want. In the UK, a lot of Norse and Germanic beliefs were prevalent. We still have Thor's Day, don't we? And Odin's Day, Wednesday. Freya's Day, Friday.
James is freezing a little bit.
But my apologies, everyone. But yeah, there was a existential threat to the church, and so what began to happen is there was an influx of ideas throughout the period of the Roman Empire into Europe around some beliefs like reincarnation, around looking at Jesus in a different way, looking at what we are as humans, bits of clay with a trapped soul within it. There were all sorts of different notions there. And by the time of the Cathars, you've got the south of France is prospering, but the Bogomilist sort of Cathar ideas, and belief system is actually, much more concentrated in today's Belgium and northern France, as opposed to in the south. Certainly, there was a large number of Bogomilists that were in this area who took a different view on the world. The Cathars being the first sort of vegetarians, or the famous vegetarians, if you want. But what was it about this area? I think the first thing to say is the reason the church came for the Cathars is because this area, famous for its toleration of other beliefs, was prospering. It was an economic powerhouse. You had trade across the Mediterranean with, again, different cultures, societies over the border into Spain, perhaps then to Al-Andalus. So you've got this economic activity. Meanwhile, in the north of France, which had recently, had been taken over by Normans, Norse men, hence Normandy, frequent raiding and all of that had left the north of France battered, to the point that the French king ends up gifting Normandy to Vikings, essentially. So south of France comes on target, and it really starts, if we want, the origin of this is someone called Pierre de Castelnau, or Castelnau. And he was what's known as a papal legate, and he was sent in 1199 by Pope Innocent, who we've referred to. And he was sent with 2 Cistercian monks to enter this area, which is known as the Languedoc and Occitania, but referring to Languedoc specifically to combat heresy.
And Languedoc means language of the Oc, right? The Occitanie language.
Yes. Actually, the Oc just means yes. If you must know, it's just the way that they say yes. But the Languedoc, if you look on a map of France, you've got this sort of crescent that goes all the way over to Italy. If you sort of cover that coast, roughly that's what we're referring to. That's the area, the Languedoc. And so Pierre de Castelnau is sent, as I say, to Cistercian monks and enters the Cistercian abbey at Fontfroid or near to Narbonne. And he's investigating and trying to suppress heresy. Now, for those who are jumping ahead and going, oh, are we talking about the Inquisition? Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, but it didn't start in Spain, it started here in France. But this is a period before the Inquisition has started. The Pope believes that he can send one of his men over into the area and bring these so-called heretics back on side. As I'd mentioned before, there were plenty of other Sibylian, the Photinian, plenty of heresies in this area where the Pope had instructed, I mentioned Alcuin of York and others, to come and bring people back into the fold. So that seemed to have worked before. Is it going to work now? Well, Castelnau's in Toulouse, Montpellier, Viviers, and one of the counts, Raymond of Toulouse, I think it was Raymond VI of Toulouse, refused to cooperate with the legate, and as such he was excommunicated. And on the 15th of January 1208, when Castelnau was returning back to Rome, he's assassinated. And of course, the blame for this assassination is squarely at the Count of Toulouse. Now, who knows who actually assassinated him? To be honest, it could have been Raymond. I tend to think that, you know, we're looking at another JFK perhaps. But there you go. Raymond's responsible, according to the supporters of the Pope, and he's obviously guilty because he's supporting these heretics. We'll just use the word Cathar, it's easier, but he's a supporter, and as such, clearly this heresy is much worse than thought. And what began...
Sorry to interrupt, but you said that what we think of as the Spanish Inquisition, or we've heard that, that actually, the Inquisition actually started in France. Was it started in Albi, and is that why it's often referred to as the Albigensian Crusades?
Well, the reason it's called the Albigensian Crusade is because of Albi, yes. Break it down. Albi is a town east of Toulouse, if you're looking on a map. And we're seen as the hotbed of Catharism, of this heresy. The gen part just means people, so it's the people of Albi, those people, and yes, it's crusade. But the Inquisition doesn't come until later, until someone called Dominic Guzman, of whom my opinion's pretty low of, but Dominic Guzman comes along and essentially, along with another Pope to be, essentially creates the Inquisition, of which every secret police force is essentially based in history. Now, leading this crusade is someone, and listeners, please don't try and spit too much at your radio sets or at YouTube, but I'm going to have to mention someone called Simon de Montfort. Yes, and he was the 5th Earl of Leicester. And he participated alongside a number of the lords of this and counts of this area in what when we refer to the Crusades, we often think of the Middle East. We often think of, oh, this is where the Templars were. Yes, they were. But we often think of the Middle East or the Levant. And there were counts who were going on crusade, because the idea of a crusade is you do 40 days service, and once you've done your 40 days service, all of your sins are wiped. So if you've gone out killing the night before, off you go on crusade, and you know, your sins are wiped. So like I say, the leader of this crusade, Simon de Montfort, or Simon de Montfort, who'd participated in the crusade in the Middle East, in the Fourth Crusade, is and gains his notoriety not for that, but for the crusade against the people of southern France. Southern France at the time, it's not part of the Kingdom of France. These are independent counties. Some of them have an allegiance to the French king, some of them have allegiance to the King of Aragon, some of them are fiercely independent, but it's a smattering of independent territories. So this it's not just a crusade. To a lot of people, this was an invasion. And they'd used an excuse of heresy, but it was really felt, and I tend to agree, that the invasion was to try and, well, steal a load of money, wealth, and land. Right.
It always comes down to the bottom line, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It seems, you know, there's always some monetary gain or power gain or something like that, no matter what you want to dress it up as. But yeah, I think that sounds right. That you know, because certainly that's what happened.
Yeah.
You know, they just co-opted everything.
And this wasn't like a crusade that I think Europe had seen on its own territory. There were other crusades. There was a crusade later against Aragon, against the Teutonic Knights, the Baltic Crusades. There were other crusades, but this was barbaric even by the standards of the time. And de Montfort moves down with his northern allies, and it's not just that he's after the Cathars, because it's, I think you've seen in the United States, they're the house of un-American activities. You're a communist, it's off to prison you go. You know, or the Salem witch trials, you know, you're a witch, you know, you're a Cathar, so as such, we're coming to get your town. And if you imagine what it's like being surrounded by a northern army who speak differently to you, and they're chanting before they invade, before they attack. It was Veni Sancti Spiritus, I think, from memory. Please do, check up on that. But they're chanting, you know, in this Gregorian way. Just imagine the fear, knowing that essentially your life's about to be.
Yeah, they're coming to get you.
And people were frightened. And the reason for this was shock and awe. Béziers, we mentioned Béziers before. The entirety of the town of Béziers. So the 21st of July, 1209. So a few days before we've got an anniversary of Béziers. And it was one of the first places to be attacked. And the Crusaders reached the town, as I say, on the 21st. And the Catholics in Béziers were given an ultimatum to hand over the heretics or leave before the Crusaders got to the city. Otherwise, they will share their fate and perish with them. Now, the Catholics refused to do this. And let's just take something from that. There are Catholics and so-called heretics, but the Catholics refused to leave with them. That's how tolerant these were. Friends and families, and would you leave friend or family because some northern invader has decided they don't quite like the cut of your jib, so to speak. And so even priests, nobody was spared. It was a bloody massacre, famously set on fire. You mentioned Bram. Well, let's go a bit further with Bram, shall we? Where you have 300 people who are blinded, with the exception of one who's only blinded in one eye. And that person then takes the blind to Las Tus, these castles that surrounded Carcassonne, to parade themselves around these three castles. And of course, what happens with the people in the castles, they surrender almost immediately. You know, they can see what fate awaits them if they don't. This isn't, you know, the detail of these barbaric acts are referenced not because these were going on every day. I know we think of the medieval period as being bloody, it was, but because this was so shocking. And of course, you were reminded 40 days or longer, you go straight ahead, be as murderous as you like, because when you've completed your service on crusade, your sins will be removed. You don't need to worry about it. So that's the idea, and just simply for thinking differently, for having a different view on accessing the divine, which is the Cathars. Like I say, vegetarians, they didn't believe in sexual procreation. They thought bringing new life onto this planet is bringing something into hell. They didn't eat anything that procreated in that way. They tended to be vegetarians. They had some beliefs of reincarnation. They had, which we would consider very Eastern beliefs. And certainly, if you look at the map of these belief systems, they certainly originate in the East, in the Far East, perhaps, and come down the Silk Road. Cathars didn't spring up overnight. That belief system had been here perhaps as early as the 1st century BC. So this really isn't something, you know, it's not right everyone, let's be Cathars. You know, it's not like that. This isn't some sudden heresy that the church are having to deal with. This is just, you know, used as an excuse, I think, to take over a lot of land. And there were plenty of places. There's an unusual phenomenon here. So if you look at Esperanza, if you look at Limoux, those places were burnt down, and the entire villages and towns moved.
Yes. It's really wild. Now, we had, you know, there are lots of, you know, locations. The Cathars obviously were somewhat prosperous, if not, you know, very prosperous, because we see these great, you know, castles and fortresses atop a lot of the hilltops and mountains here in the area. So I think, you know, people largely think of Cathars as, you know, these ascetic people who were just praying all the time. But I believe that there were a lot of people that that embraced the Cathar beliefs that were also very prosperous people and built a lot of, you know, these structures. There's, you know, of course, Peripetus and, you know, Montsegur, which people say was the last stronghold of the Cathars, but I believe you have an argument for that.
Well, yeah, there were plenty of. Firstly, the so-called.
I think there's still Cathars here.
I don't think the belief system went too far. First thing to say, a lot of the so-called Cathar castles weren't built by Cathars. They were built long before.
moved in.
But the owners of them, shared
They don't
some
make that?
Cathar sympathies.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. So the owners were not necessarily Cathars, but they were sympathetic to them. But were some of them Cathar?
Yeah, for sure. You've got you've got Paul Fenried, for example. He was a known Cathar. There was Bernard Aton, who oddly enough ends up stopping in a Templar house, fleeing from Crusaders. He most certainly was. Like I say, the French word is faydit, Faydit. Of course, certainly sympathetic. Whether they actually were Cathars, it depends on who we're referring to. But yes, some of the Cathars did prosper. They did have some cash behind them. There is an idea, in fact, that Montsegur had a treasury. It's certainly referenced as a creditarium in some documentation where those who were donating, or dare I say it, there are some examples of Cathars forcing what I'm going to simplify this very, very basically, but what we might call the last rite, they call the consolamentum. I know that is not correct, but I'm just keeping it as simple as I can. There were some Cathar parfaits, sort of priest, if you want, who were extracting money for the consolamentum, and so that money did end up at Montsegur. There is an anecdote of this occurring from a Cathar, by the way. But yeah, they were held up in castles. And if you imagine, Cathars, we're not just talking about knights. Again, we're talking about people who are working the land, were the sort of errand boys, the falconers, the scribers, all of these different roles within society. And the reality of the situation is those castles were there to protect villages. Mm. So, we're coming up for siege, try and get the animals and try and get all the people into the castle. And that's the notion behind it.
But this idea of the Cathars being at odds with the Knights Templar, we went to a village just recently here that shows an example of how they were right there together. Right across from the council of the Cathars was the large Templar building. I don't know if that was a preceptory or what was that building.
I think whether it's a preceptory, I think it was certainly a fortified barn.
Yeah, it looks like a big storage place or something, but I don't know what I wasn't seeing that might have been there before, whether we were seeing part of what was there, and there was more to it, and this is just what remains, or if that was the building that was. So to me, it did look like a barn.
Yeah, so you've got a
process on it.
So that town is Pierce, and I think it was Pierce anyway. And basically, yes, you've got a Cathar council that sets up the first, the first parfait, the first bishop, if you want, as well, of the area of the Ras, as it's called, an area, and overlooking where they had their first council in this area is a Templar building. Mm. Without going into too much detail, we've got, there's evidence of 2-3 Cathars buried in some Templar preceptories. We've got we've even got with the Knights Templar evidence of land donations or whatever was going on there from Jewish families. Outwardly speaking, when you look at the Cathars and the Templars, what you've got are people who are absolutely at odds. The Templars were originally set up, I don't know, to find treasure or whatever else, but they're called the Warriors of God. They're the first sort of nuns with guns. I think there was a American Steve the Nun with a Gun. I just remember, was it Father Dowling Investigates? But these are the first. They're not the first Father Dowling people, but these are armed. These are monks that, on top of their traditional oaths, they are also training. They're a killing machine and become feared across Europe and the Middle East for that. They are known as, honourable. They are chivalric, and they were in the Middle East, looking for icons and looking for, well, we could call it treasure if you want, looking for, whatever. But also one of the functions was to securely, safely transport and protect pilgrims going over to the Holy Land, or at least after their foundation in 1119 or 1118, or is it 1096? Plenty of debate on that. But in later times, they were protecting people across the Holy Land. These are the crack Catholic knights. They took vows of poverty, obedience, and celibacy. So if we look at the Cathars, like I say, normally productive sex and what have you. Well, they've got something similar there. In terms of poverty, certainly very similar.
Acidic people, and you mentioned the parfaits. For those who may not know, parfait in English is perfect. And so these people that had decided to, shed their worldly desires and be vegetarians, have no sex. I don't think they were even that keen on marriage, certainly not on having children, but they did this, and the parfaits were ones who had taken the consolamentum or whatever ritual that was at an earlier stage. Most people, just the regular people who were involved in just the belief system, would take that near to death, because they didn't want to give up everything, but they did that near to their death, very similar to the last rites given by the Catholic Church at someone's death. It's like, oh, hurry up and absolve me of my sins. I've been sinning all this time, but just do this thing and I'll be fine. It was a little bit like that in my mind. So the parfaits were the people, the most pious, I guess, of Cathars.
Yeah, for sure. Again, if we look at it outwardly, I can almost hear the academic world saying, no, they didn't have any relationship with each other. Look, outwardly, that might be true. There were very pious knights, Templar, who would have found the entire notion of a Cathar disgusting. But equally, there are also those knights and preceptors. When we talk about the difference between a commandery and a preceptory, Templars had preceptories, but if they were taken over by the Hospitaller, who were another order, after the Templars were disbanded, they became known as a commandery then. So we subtle differences, it's just wording, but there were certainly preceptors, commanders, who must have been sympathetic to Cathars. I mean, these were, at the end of the day, friends and families of people who, they grew up with. So again, as I say, the traditional argument has been there is no connection between the Templars and the Cathars, and yet you visit sites. I mean, me and you have stood upon, not deliberately, I should just say, but we have stood upon the grave site of 2 or 3 Cathars who were dug up from a commandery, or from a preceptory as was, but from a commandery, so that they could be burnt 23 years after they died. So how do we explain Cathars, relatively well-known Cathars for that matter, in a Templar commandery? If there wasn't some sympathy somewhere, it just strikes me as unusual that you would have, Templars hate Cathars, they didn't get on. Well, come on then. Please explain that site, or actually some others for that matter.
Right.
Of which there are increasingly numerous.
Yeah, and I mean, they were side by side. I mean, it wasn't very far from the Cathar Council that building stood. I mean, they were right there. You could see them from each other. So it's like, it's hard to think that they were not getting along. It just seems a little far-fetched.
And so we've got, what we've got here in France. I mean, we've spoke. I think we've covered about 8,000 years of history, something like that so far the show. But you've got, there were lots of donations given to the Cathars to support their lifestyles and all of this. Where did that gold, if you want, end up? And of course, you've got the great question of the where did the Templars cash go? And that really is one of the huge mysteries of history, isn't it? What happened to the Templar gold? And there's plenty of rumor that it ended up in this area, hidden in this area. Again, we've got other traditions, from Alaric in the menorah and other holy items to, did the Templars bring something from the, from the Middle East as well? So, yeah, it's certainly very, very interesting, considering that there might have been a little bit more going on. Not to mention, I should say, Jewish donations of land to the Knights Templar. I mean, was this, here's land, will you protect us kind of thing? Well, again, you're kind of at odds, really, between, you've got these invaders from the north who are trying to combat heretics. At the same time, you've got, you have some Templars, or at least people who are working for them, who were known to be Jewish. Yeah, I think what we're dealing with is, yes, we know about the Templars and we know about the Order and we know about all of this, but I think in this area certainly, where you've got toleration and you've grown up with people, there might be some instances where it's not quite as clear cut. And just bear in mind, what the Templars were doing in this area, essentially farming land, selling the proceeds, or sending over what they grew over to the Middle East to support the Templars in the area. I mean, shortly after the Second Crusade, I think there was all but 3 castles that were still in secular hands. The rest were owned by the Templars, the hospital, etc. So they had quite a lot of land and property to defend in the Middle East, and so essentially that money, that support was going over that way.
So many people and seemingly, strange connections. So many people donated to the Templars, donated land, and I know that a lot toward the end of where everyone thinks all the Templars were wiped out, but we know they weren't. A lot of them went down into Spain, or what is now Spain, and the king, was it King Alfonso?
Mm-hmm.
That,
yes.
That was an odd thing for him to do. He donated lots of property and fortune to the Knights Templar when there was seemingly no connection.
Well, at the founding of the Knights Templar, you had the King of Aragon. Now, Aragon, we might think of today as being closer to Barcelona and that area, but at the time, if you look at a map of the Pyrenees and you go about halfway through and draw a sort of line at a right angle to the Pyrenees, that's Aragon. And they were
Are we in Aragon? Or what was Aragon? How close are we where we sit in Esperanza, France?
At one point, not far at all. I mean, in the early 13th century, in the 1220s, Rennes-le-Château was sacked by the King of Aragon. It wasn't, the border with Aragon wasn't that far. And don't forget the counts and independent counties, some hold their allegiance to the Crown of Aragon, not France. So the Roussillon, as it was a part of Aragon and then Spain later.
This region is called the Languedoc-Roussillon, so that's what you're referring to there. Yes, I know it was close by. I just didn't know quite how close, and it would seem that now, which king of Aragon sacked Rennes-le-Château or attacked them anyway?
Oh, I want to say Alfonso II, but off the top of my head, it's not coming. But I just wanted to pick up on something you did say about.
It wasn't the same Alfonso that
no
donated all these things. Okay, that's
no.
what I wanted.
There was Alfonso the Battler, as he was known, who left in his will. He actually gifted the entire kingdom of Aragon, which is facing a little further north at this point, but gifted the entire kingdom of Aragon to the Knights Templar, the Hospitaller, and the Knights of Christ. The Templars had only recently been established, and the key question is why? And that will was independently witnessed up towards Biarritz and in the Basque Country. Why would you do that? I mean, he was a pious man for sure, but strikes me as a very bizarre thing to leave your kingdom to some knights. And it is perhaps that one of the reasons for the Templars being disbanded and attacked the way that they were was because of the fact that the Templars might have ended up with an independent kingdom here in the Languedoc. Curiously, though, the Cathars may have had a part in the downfall of the Templars.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, Philip le Bel, as he's called, I have some other names. Yes, I have some other names for him.
Yeah.
Famously disbanded the Templars because he was broke, and there might have been some other reasons for that. But Guillaume de Nogaret was his treasurer, and it is believed that he witnessed the burning in a place called Saint Felix de Laurier. That he witnessed his parents and friends, elders, etc., being burned as Cathars in that area. And as such held a grudge against the Pope. And it might be the case that that grudge meant that he organized the downfall of the Templars, not because he was going for the Templars, but because they were the Pope's private army. And in order to get at the Pope, you need to go for the Templars. We know that he went and kidnapped the Pope. We had the Avignon papacy. He did do this. And it could be, now I'm still researching, still trying to get a little bit more on the notion of this burning of Cathars, but most certainly St. Felix de Laurier was a very central part of the Cathar belief system in this area. It was a really crucial place, up near Albi for that matter.
You know, something curious struck me when you mentioned it earlier. You mentioned Paul de Fenouillet and as a Cathar. And interestingly, you know, we know there's the church, St. Paul de Fenouillet. And if he was a Cathar, why is there a Catholic church named for him?
Well, there's plenty of them to choose from, but essentially you've got the counts of the Fenouillet, and some members of that family were known Cathars. So it might very well be that the person that I'm referring to may have been a different
different person. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. That makes sense. Yeah, I thought there's something really interesting there. There's so many puzzling and confusing things here, but it's fun to dig into them as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Saint-Pierre de Fenouillet. You've got all of these very similar names and all of that, all within the area. But certainly that area was a lot of Templar land in that area, and a lot of Cathar activity too.
Yeah, absolutely. So when the Templars were disbanded, and their Grand Master Jacques de Molay was burned at the stake by Philip the Fair on his orders, not literally. What happened? Where did they go? Where did the Templars that weren't killed or rounded up, where did they go? I know you're writing a whole book about it.
I'm currently writing about this. Where did they go in a nutshell? So for a lot of the Templars,
certainly down into Spain, if they were given the Kingdom of Aragon, I would think a bunch had gone down that way, I would think. But we also hear about going into Scotland and with the Cistercians.
As we know, the Templars didn't take control of Aragon, but they certainly got some strategic castles. So the reality was, for a lot of Templars, they carried on working the lands. Who ended up owning the castles is more interesting. The hospital certainly took over a majority of the properties. That was the papal instruction. And there was talk in 1304 of the two merging anyway. That didn't happen. What happened to the Templars in England and Scotland? Well, the problem is, it doesn't appear that in some of the Templar sites there was actually a change of ownership at all. In France, for a lot of people, they would have carried on working the land, but for knights and esquires and other such people, yes, a lot of them moved into Aragon and then over to Majorca. There's some examples of, just thinking of one, of a Templar that ended up becoming an ambassador from the Caliphate in Northern Africa. Some knights ended up as changing orders, but joined the Knights of Malta, the hospital, the Teutonic Knights. Some, it seems, ended up fleeing to perhaps Scotland, perhaps to Ireland. But there seems to have been a movement away. I mean, in Germany, they forcibly resisted arrest and sort of ended up joining the crowd, kind of thing. But where did they end up? And there are key questions. Where did their treasure end up? Where did their gold end up? Well, honestly, we can debate that till the cows come home and until some treasure's found. But more curiously, it's the orders that succeeded the Templars. So in Portugal, a copy and paste exercise happened, right? An argument. I've got some copies of the argument between the King of Portugal and the Pope. He was saying, hold on, we're trying to free ourselves. We're at war with the Al-Andalus, this Islamic territory in Spain. And you're getting rid of my crack fighting force in the Templars. That's not happening. And there's letters to and fro, very interesting stuff. So here's what happens. They copy and paste everything from the Templars and just give them a name change. They became the Order of Christ, still with us today. In France, they realized that getting rid of the Templars caused instability with the royal family further down the line and needed some sort of protection. So you ended up another sort of copy and paste exercise occurs with what's called the Garde de la Coste, the Scots Guard. So you end up with Scottish families. Some of you've heard of the Sinclairs, the Campbells, who had members who were Templars previously, who were then joining the Scots Guard to protect the French throne. That comes to an end when Mary Queen of Scots ascends to the throne. For a lot of the Templars, it was a name change, and that was it. But in France, things got difficult.
Yeah.
And a lot of Templars were tortured, and certainly I'm reading through at the moment some of the torture, some of the Inquisition and torture records from the time that occurred down in Perpignan and Carcassonne.
Yeah. Well, we're getting very, very close to the end of the show, and I want to, take a moment to thank you, James, for all this information, but even more so for introducing me to these new old sites that I'd never seen before. And I'm looking forward, because I know we have some other ones on the list to get to. If you'd like to reach James or me, our website is newrennies.org, www.newrennies.org. And if you want to write to us, it's info@newrennies.org. This is a place of mystery, and there's much more to explore and much more to talk about, which we're going to do. I mean, lots of people are captivated with this. I know our friend Court Lindell has a new book that's getting ready to bust out on Arcadian mysteries. And so many people are just absolutely mesmerized by what's here, especially if you manage to get yourself over here, because it's once you get here, it's the glue pot, as our beautiful friend Tim Wallace Murphy said. Always, you always come back. But James, who knows what we're going to talk about next week, because we don't know what we're going to find, along the way before we get to next week. But certainly feel free, listeners and watchers, to send us an email, send us a messages on Facebook, or even at info@newrainies.org. That's probably actually the best place to do it. And give us ideas about what you'd like to hear about, particularly in this area of France, while we're doing these live shows from France over the next few weeks. So, but again, give us a suggestion for anything that you'd like to hear about. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for joining us. And James, thank you. Now,
thank you.
When are we going to be expecting that book on the Templars?
Well, more
any time to work on it, but
when I get some more time to work on it, yes. And I'm just following up with a few more threads at the moment.
I never asked you, is there a title for it yet?
For this one, no.
I want to help you think of it.
It could be the end.
I'll make some submissions and see how they go over with you. But anyhow, thank you so much, everyone. We're all out of time. Thank you for joining us on Night Vision. And thank you to our wonderful producer, Bill. We love you. And if I was at home, I would be saying it's time to release the hounds. But since there's only one hound here, we'll let him sleep. So we'll talk to you later. Thank you.